we're going to get started. And what we're going to be talking about today is the inside of the house. I figured it would be a unique thing to do. I know it's the thing that most people want. Unfortunately, we cannot provide right now. We're closed due to safety reasons because of coronavirus. But I know that a lot of people want to get inside the house, and I figured this would be a unique way of doing it, where you have photographs. And I think there's actually a few advantages of looking at the house this way. You don't have to worry about people standing in front of you. You don't have to worry about moving on to the next room and being rushed out of the way, so on and so forth. I know from my end, I don't have to worry about people touching things, so that's great for me. So I think it's going to be fun. I will, if you guys have questions, you have the ability to unmute yourselves, and if you have questions along the way, by all means, don't hesitate to ask questions. But if not, at the end, I'll allow for time for questions. All right. So this, by the way, majority of the pictures you're looking at, they were shot by a woman named Audrey Tiernan. She is an amazing photographer, and she took majority of the pictures, I believe actually all of them except for one, that we have available for our use, which is great. She's an awesome photographer. You can see a couple pictures here. You got the house on top of the hill over here. You got the front hallway, and you got the Eel Creek, which is down by Cold Spring Harbor. This property here at Sagamore Hill is, nowadays it's 82, 83 acres. It was at one point over 150 acres in his time. But we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so when you're coming to visit Sagamore Hill, this is where you start your visit, okay? You're the front door, okay? You know, people nowadays, they don't realize that there was once a time where you could wake up any day of the week and go, I want to speak to the President of the United States, and expect to do so as an everyday citizen. Of course, security concerns, for a very good reason, for actually many very good reasons, have changed that and limited access to the president. But in Theodore Roosevelt's time, even after he was the third president, assumed the presidency after an assassination, he was still very easily accessible, okay? So this front door, you would have hundreds of people waiting outside this door when he was home during the summer months of his presidency, wanting to speak to the president, waiting online, all right? Now this big brown door, it's a cool door. You can see it breaks in half. It's a door, all right? Always wanted one of those doors. The other thing I always point out to people, because I have a sense of humor, is I would love to move furniture in and out of this house, just because that doorway is so big, it's so easy. I know that when I move furniture at home, it's definitely not the same experience. Okay, so this is the front hall, all right? You can see a couple different things here. So the first thing you can see, the Cape Buffalo over the fireplace. We called him Fred until we found out that it's actually a female. So now I guess we jokingly call her Frederica. She's the way you could tell is the top of the head of the Cape Buffalo. You could see there's like that little space, that little gap in between the horns. The male buffaloes do not have that, so that's how you can tell just from looking at the head of the animal. All right. The elephant tusks that you can see right in front of her, they have these long gold gongs in the front. You can see them here a little bit, and you can see them a little bit better over here. All right. These gongs were rung to signify that dinner was ready. When the gongs were rung, it knew that they had 10 minutes to get washed up and get to the dining room table. If they did not get there in the 10 minutes, they had to eat dinner in the kitchen with the cook, and they were subject to any amount of chores that the cook felt were necessary. All right? And the cook would not take it easy on them just because they were the president's kids. All right? Another thing I love to point out is these blue and white vases. You can see a closer shot there, and you can see them better over here. They're beautiful to look at, but Roosevelt would store his tennis balls in them. Roosevelt loved to play tennis. So whenever somebody would come to Sagamore Hill and wanted to play tennis, he would grab his rackets, which he used to leave right next to the fireplace, grab the tennis balls, which he left in the vases, and he'd run down the hill and play tennis on his court that he used to have next to his driveway. All right. The last thing I kind of like to point out in this space, well, the second to last thing I like to point out in this space is this rhinoceros statue over here. That was given to Theodore Roosevelt on his birthday from his sister and Sister Corinne, and he loves it. It's big, it's rugged, it's manly, it's outdoorsy, it's adventurous. But Mrs. Roosevelt, she can't stand the sight of that thing. And when she comes in the front door, usually the first thing she does, takes off her hat, a big floral decorative hat, puts it on the horn of the animal, try to cover up the head. And then she'll put notes. That's kind of hard to see, but believe it or not, they're actually little birds on the back of the rhinoceros. She puts notes on those birds of chores that she wants her children to do, okay? So she's not really a big fan of it. Now, the last thing I like to point out is that this space, this hallway here, used to be like the waiting room to speak to the President of the United States. It was like the unofficial waiting room. And when the house was first built, the house stopped right where you see this opening right here. The house stopped originally right there. When the house is first built, by the way, I should probably start there. The house, Theodore Roosevelt buys the house in 1880. He buys the property, I should say, in 1880. Like I said, it's over 150 acres. He pays about 30 grand for it. Construction of the house begins in 1884. It's completed in 1886. I'm sorry, 1885. And they move in 1886 as a family. So when the house is first built, when they build it for, I believe it's almost $17,000, the house would have stopped right here, okay? This north room you see off in the distance, and you can see another shot of it over here, that gets added on in 1905, but we'll talk about that later on, all right? Does anybody have any questions before I move on from this slide? Okay, moving on. So here's another shot of the front hall. You can see the stairwell going up to the second floor. You can see this hallway, it brings you back to the kitchen. I like this angle because it shows you a different perspective of the front hall. Gives you an idea of where people can go in the house, kind of a thing. The other reason why I like this is because I am a sucker for grandfather clocks, and this is one of my favorite. I love this grandfather clock. It was actually a legitimate grandfather clock. It was, Roosevelt actually inherited it from his grandfather. It's a beautiful clock, and when you think that that thing gets cranked, I believe it's once a week or once every other week, it's pretty good, pretty spot on with time. I would hate to think how I function at that age. All right, so next slide. We got the library, okay? Now, when you first walk into the house, this is the first room you see on the right. And this is Roosevelt's office, okay? You can see a desk off to the right over here. Hold on. See a desk right off to the right over here. This is his desk, okay? Roosevelt uses this really for, before 1905, he uses this as like the small, intimate meeting room. If you come in here to speak to the President of the United States, this is the room that you're dying to get into because this is where he'll sit down and talk to you one-on-one and discuss any business or concerns you may have. The other thing I like to point out, you're going to see it throughout this whole tour, is going to be the amount of books in the house. There is an insane number of books in this house. A lot of people ask when they come to Sagamore Hill, does Theodore Roosevelt have a presidential library and museum? And I always say yes. It's holding up his house because of the number of books in this house. It's just crazy. I believe over 10,000 books in the house. So there are just books all over this house. Roosevelt loves to read, reads at least a book a day. And not only is he a speed reader, he's got a photographic memory. So he's able to recite word for word from a book years and years after he's read it. In other words, he was equipped perfectly for college. I wish I had those skills. I did not. All right. This wall we're looking at right now, this is called the Wall of Heroes. Okay. Well, that's what we call it, I should say, nowadays. You can see in the back right corner is a portrait of George Washington. The man next to him is John Marshall. He's the longest-serving Supreme Court Chief Justice. Ulysses S. Grant is this small one, 18th President of the United States, and the commander of the United States Army, or the Union Army, in the Civil War. The big portrait in the middle, that is of Theodore Roosevelt Sr. That's Theodore Roosevelt's father. As Theodore Roosevelt put it, the greatest man I ever knew. The portrait next to him is, of course, Abraham Lincoln without the facial hair. All right. This painting over here, I always tell this story. When I was a kid and I first came to Sagamore Hill, I have vivid memories of my first trip to Sagamore Hill. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is this painting of the bull moose. I wish there was a better picture to show the whole thing. But this is a beautiful painting. It's called The Charging Moose. It's done by Carl Rungius. He was a famous wildlife artist. And it's just a beautiful painting. It's given to Roosevelt by Heckscher. When you think of Heckscher State Park, that's the same guy. All right. So we're going to move on to the next slide here. This is a close-up of his desk. You know, I always think of when I'm a big history nerd, and when I go to presidential homes, and I've been fortunate enough to been to a few of them, I love to see what their workspaces look like, because I know my workspace at home, it speaks to me. It shows everything about me. So I think I was very curious about Roosevelt's workspace. So it was one of the first things I had to look at when I became an employee here at Sagamore Hill. You can see there's a inkwell over here. It's got Abraham Lincoln. Roosevelt's a big history enthusiast, absolutely loves reading about history. And you'll see his beloved wife, Edith, over here. Roosevelt loves his wife. I should mention she is the second Mrs. Roosevelt. The first Mrs. Roosevelt, Alice Hathaway Lee, who is actually the person who he buys this property and builds this home in intention of living with, she unfortunately dies just 2 days after giving birth to their first and only child, who's named after her. She dies on February 14th, 1884. She dies on the same day in the same house, just hours apart from Theodore Roosevelt's mother. They die in a house that his parents owned in Manhattan. And Mrs. Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt's wife, dies of Bright's disease, and his mother dies of typhoid fever. So Valentine's Day for most of us is a nice day. Well, for most of us, I'll say it that way. And with Theodore Roosevelt, unfortunately, it's a painful day. He has to block it out of his mind. He even puts a big X in his diary and says, "The light has gone out of my life." That's his diary entry for February 14th, 1884. He's just absolutely devastated. All right, but he does he marries Edith Kermit Carew, and she insists on bringing Alice here to Sagamore Hill when they move in 1886, and she wants to raise her as her own child, and does. Alice and Edith, a lot of people ask how their relationship was. I would say Alice and Edith's relationship was just like Alice's relationship with everybody else. There was a lot of love, but also a lot of head scratching, head shaking, and a lot of wondering what is wrong with Alice, because Alice was very much a difficult child. She gave even Theodore Roosevelt the run for his money. All right. So the next room we're going to look at is the drawing room. Now, if you can remember that shot of walking in the main hall, the front hall, if you go to the right, that's the library. If you go to the left, the other direction, that is the drawing room. Now, this is one of Edith's escapes. Well, it's supposed to be, okay? This is, you can see, well, when we go through the rest of the house, you'll really notice that this room is decorated very differently than the rest of the rooms in the house. Not that I want to give you guys the impression that there's any kind of rhyme or reason as to how this house is decorated, okay? Seems like every single room has like 8 different styles of chairs, no matching carpets. There's all these animals laying around and hanging on the wall and all that. So I don't want you to think that there's any kind of decorating concept when it comes to this house. But this room seems to be the most well put together. Everything kind of blends together. A lot of the furniture in this room is inherited from his parents, okay? A lot of the more fancier stuff you'll see throughout the house is actually from his parents, okay? But this is where Edith goes to kind of get away from everything. But unfortunately, as I pointed out in the front hall, That was, the front hall was the unofficial waiting room. But that space is very small, so it fills up very quickly. And when it does, it overflows into this drawing room over here. And Edith is none too happy about that, okay? The important thing that I always point out to people is that Edith and Theodore are complete opposite ends of the social spectrum, okay? Roosevelt has this huge personality. He was one of my favorite anecdotal stories about him was that a hunter, a famous hunter, was in Washington, D.C. Roosevelt finds out that this hunter is in Washington, D.C. This hunter has no intention of speaking to the president. But he finds out this hunter is in town. He sends a messenger for him to bring him to the White House. When the hunter arrives, he's brought into Theodore Roosevelt's office. It's not the Oval Office, not yet. And he speaks to Theodore Roosevelt. He emerges hours later. The secretary asks the hunter, "What did you talk to the president about for so long?" And the hunter turns to him and says, "All I did was mention my name." And the president did the rest. All right, Roosevelt has this huge personality. Every time he goes into a room, he's just got to be the center of attention. He's always looking for it. He's a big ham. Okay? Mrs. Rhodes, she's private. She likes to be kept to herself. She likes to be alone. She doesn't like all these strangers in her house trying to talk to her kids, trying to talk to her husband, waiting in her rooms, waiting here, waiting there, looking in here, looking in there. She doesn't like that. She needs an escape. This is supposed to be one of them, because even the children know that when they come to this room that they have to wait until mother acknowledges them before they can enter the room. But unfortunately, when he becomes president of the United States, that goes all the wayside because it becomes a glorified waiting room. Another one. All right. Now the other thing I like to point out over here is it's really kind of hard to see. I wish there was a better shot. But over here by this window, there is a smaller desk that Edith uses. Edith writes letters to friends and family. A lot of the information that we have about the house and why and how we know what it looked like in his time, not only because of photographs that we have, but also a lot of it is because of Edith. She writes letters. You know, back then they don't have text messages. They don't have email. Okay? If you want to communicate with someone that's not right next to you, you either do a phone call or you send a letter. And at that time, people wrote a lot of letters. So she'll write letters about how she loves the color in this room, how she loves this painting in that room. And she'll write about how she can't stand this, she can't stand that. So we get a lot of our information about the house from Edith's letters. Okay? All right. Next room. Now, if you can remember, and I'm sorry I keep referencing it, but if you remember the front hall, when I showed you where the north room was off in the distance, this is just before the north room on the right. This is the dining room, okay? Now, the first thing that most people say is, hey, the Roosevelts had 6 kids. There's 2 of them. There's only 6 chairs at this table. What's going on? All right? Well, this table, ironically, is actually the original table. This table was purchased on Edith and Theodore's honeymoon in 1886. But of course, kids come into the picture. He starts to rise in prominence. So they decide to buy a bigger table. So they buy a rectangular table which would have comfortably sat all 8 members of the family. Okay. Now, Mrs. Roosevelt would sit at the far end of the table, and Theodore would sit at the close end of the table, his back towards us. All right. Now, Theodore Roosevelt was a unique kind of parent, especially in his time, because he felt that his children had every much the right to say something as adults did. So when he had famous people over for dinner, whether it was future President William Howard Taft, or John Muir was another one, or the future First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, or James R. Garfield, who was his Secretary of Interior. When he had these people over for dinner, he would insist his kids sit down at the table with them, and that they will participate in the conversation. I know when I was a kid, I got banished to a kiddie table, and I had to keep the volume down. Of course, my parents struggled with that, but Roosevelt's not like that. He wants to hear his kids. And not only does he want to hear his kids, but he expects to hear from them. He expects them to contribute not what their favorite ice cream flavor is, but he wants to hear them contribute to the adult conversation. If they're talking about the outdoors, he wants to hear his kids talk about the outdoors. If they're talking about something in government, he wants to hear his kids talk about something in government. He expects to hear from them. And this is his way of quizzing them and testing their knowledge. Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who's the oldest of the boys and the second oldest after Alice, and I should say the first oldest of Edith and Theodore, he says that sitting at that dining room table is where he receives the best education of his life, which really means a lot when you consider the fact that he's got a degree from Harvard. All right? So, next room. Now you can see, I actually forgot to include this picture. You can see the view of the dining room from the hall. I actually really like this shot. It's a different perspective. Usually when you're doing a house tour, usually there's all these people standing right here. So you don't get to see this nice little open floor shot of the first floor. Okay. So normally on a normal house tour, we would go through the whole house. We would see each room, first, second, and third floor. But I thought that this was a great opportunity to really kind of focus and hunker down on the first floor and really give you guys a chance to absorb it. All right. Normally on a normal house tour, we would go to the north room after the dining room. But I figured I would save the north room for last, and we'll get to that when I get to that room. Okay. So this is the kitchen. Now, if you can remember that shot of the front hall, and you saw the stairwell, we were looking straight ahead towards the stairwell, you saw that hallway to the left. That brings you to the butler's pantry, and then, which is on the left, and then straight ahead is the kitchen. All right. Now, this is a dual-purpose stove you can see here, wood burning and coal burning. Okay. You could see, excuse me, you could see off to the left is a water tank. For those of you that have been lucky enough to come to the grounds, you'll see on the grounds there's a huge huge windmill, I should say. That windmill is how the magic of running water at Sagamore Hill in Theodore's time happened. Okay, the blades of the windmill would turn, and you notice there's a cable running down the center of the windmill. That cable spins and it powers a pump in the pump house, which is located directly underneath it. That pump pumps the water up the hill. The cold water goes directly to the top floor, and it gravity feeds the rest of the house down. The hot water starts out cold, and it gets fed back and forth in pipes behind the stove over here, where it gets warm and and then it gets stored in that water tank over there. I should probably use the mouse. So it runs back and forth in pipes behind the stove here, and then it gets stored in this water tank where it keeps hot. Now, someone's job was to come over here and manually pump the water up to the third floor where we gravity feed the rest of the house down. And that's how the magic of running water at Sagamore Hill happens. Okay? Now, a lot of people, they ask, when it comes to the food, they ask what was Roosevelt's favorite food, so on and so forth. Roosevelt had a big sweet tooth. Roosevelt loved sweets. Roosevelt's mother, Martha Bullock, she was born and raised in Roswell, Georgia. She is a Southern belle, so he is raised on Southern cooking. He loves fried chicken. He loves cornbread. You'll see oysters on that plate over there. Believe it or not, I know it's kind of crazy to think, but some people have asked me from other states if oysters are a big deal in Oyster Bay. Yes, they absolutely are. And Roosevelt loves oysters. Okay, Thanksgiving, his stuffing has oysters in them. Okay, I know some people don't do that. They do like a bread stuffing, but his stuffing is an oyster stuffing. He loves oysters. All right. Now, the other thing I like to point out, too, in the kitchen is earlier I mentioned about the kids. If they were late to the dining room table, their punishment was they had to eat their dinner in the kitchen with the cook. And that's what this small table is. That's what the kids had to do. If they were late to the dining room table, they had to eat dinner in here. Of course, the other added punishment to that is they had to wait until everyone else was done eating in order to start to eat. Okay? So you did not want to be late to dinner. By the way, Edith also inspected her kids to make sure that they were clean. All right? When the gongs were rung, the kids, like I said, they knew they had 10 minutes to get washed up and get to that dining table. If they did not pass Edith's inspection, they got sent up to go do a better job. And if they did not make it back in the 10 minutes, that clock is always ticking, then they had to eat dinner in here. All right? Okay, so the North Room. Okay, so this is the room that everyone remembers. When they come to Sagamore Hill, this is the room that everyone, they come years and years later and they go, oh, I remember this room, the big room. They call us up and they say, oh, the last time I went to Sagamore Hill was 30 years ago. I remember that big room. I always tell my kids about it. I'm coming there this week. Everyone's so excited to see this North Room, and this is the room that everyone remembers, okay? The first thing that most people notice are all the animal heads, okay? Roosevelt, probably his biggest legacy is his conservation efforts, So you'll see all these animals on display, and a lot of people go, well, how could he be known for conservation and have all these animals on display? Well, Roosevelt's interest in animals starts as a kid. He's a real unique kid. He goes through the Central Park, which is right by his parents' house. He runs through there and he listens to bird calls. He's obsessed with birding. And he actually will play games with people, have competitions to see who could name the most birds by listening to bird calls the fastest. And he is just obsessed with birds. But naturally, you're more curious about these animals. You want to get closer to these animals. And when Roosevelt would, as a little boy, run across dead birds or dead mice, he would take them home. He would cut them open, and he would study them, okay? At that time, you got to remember, there's no National Geographic. There is no Google. There is no Wikipedia to give you what Joe up the block is thinking, okay? You have to really kind of either read books, which some of these books are still being written about about some of these animals at that time, or you have to go out in the wild and study them up close and personal, which is probably not your best choice for something that could either gore you like a buffalo, or step on you like an elephant, or can eat you like a tiger. Oh, by the way, you also have to worry about all these native exotic plants that could be poisonous and dangerous. You have to worry about snakes that can bite you and also give you poison. So you got to worry about all these concerns for your health. So the other alternative was to hire people. Hunters, like Roosevelt, would get hired by museums, like the Museum of Natural History, to collect specimens for their museums to study, for their scientists to study. So we gain so much knowledge from hunters and scientists working together, okay? Because a lot of these scientists don't want to risk their lives to go in the wilderness, so they pay these hunters to bring back the specimens, and that's what Roosevelt does. Majority of his hunts, especially in the later half of his life, are really with that in mind, to bring back specimens. 1909, after he leaves the White House, he goes on a safari. I always tell people, if you want to know how much he loves being president of the United States, when he leaves the White House, he goes on a safari for 9 months. By the way, Roosevelt always turns to the outdoors when he's going through some kind of rough point in his life. So that goes to show you how much he loved being president of the United States. But he is hired by museums to collect specimens for their scientists to study, and that's what he does. Okay, even to this day, you can see a lot of his specimens on display in the Museum of Natural History. Okay, the elephant tusks right in front, you can see, I mean, sometimes they kind of blend into the background, but these elephant tusks, they were given to Roosevelt as a gift, okay, from Ethiopia, from the ruler of Ethiopia at that time. The elephant tusks, this elephant was not killed. He actually lived a full life, died of natural causes, and when the elephant died, they removed the tusks. The leader decided to remove the tusks and send them to the president as a gift. So they're on display in the North Room. The tusks are 8 feet tall. All right, they are huge. The other thing I like to point out in the room, the circular table. You can see a couple of things here. This Japanese samurai warrior, that was a gift from Japanese Admiral Togo. I had great respect for Roosevelt, so he gave him this Japanese samurai soldier after Roosevelt helped negotiate the end of the Russo-Japanese War. The book over here is a book of German mythology called the Nibelungenlied. Okay, it's like I said, Greek German mythology. Think of like Norse gods, that kind of thing. That's what's in the books. What's in the book. All right. Towards the back of the room, you could see the presidential seal carved, hanging on the wall. It's done by a gentleman named Gutzon Borglum. That's a gentleman who carves Mount Rushmore. He spends some time here, greatly admires and respects the president. So he carves that out for him, and it's hung on the wall. There's a mirror image on the outside of the house. Okay. In the back corner, actually, let me see if I can scroll a different picture, give you a different view. Here's a different views. Here's a better view of the elephant tusks. Okay. This is a painting over here. When shadow meets light, it's this beautiful painting of the Grand Canyon. It's an awesome painting. Now here you can see a better shot of the Japanese samurai soldier and that German mythology book. Okay. And we're going to take a look at the next shot, the next page. Now you can see this is towards the back of the room, looking towards the front. Now if you were on tour, you would be standing over here looking this way. So from standing over here, this is not a perspective you get. Matter of fact, most of this stuff over here is hidden because you have all these objects in front of it. So you really get a good idea of how big this room is. This is a 30 by 40 room. It's added on in 1905 as part of an extension. It cost almost $19,000 to add this one room on. Okay, just keep in mind when the whole house is built in 1884, 1885, it's built for 17 grand. So just this one room costs more than the whole house, all right, to add on. It's crazy to think that way. Okay, now. One of my favorite things in the house. All right, so this is his Rough Rider hat and saber sword mounted on this elk head over here. It's really awesome. I love this shot. Audrey got this awesome picture of this. I think it's just one of the better pictures that we have in recent time. It's just such a great angle. Now, Roosevelt, of course, we all know. He served so many different positions in his life. His first political position is New York State Assemblyman. In no particular order after that, he serves as Civil Service Commissioner under 2 presidents. He serves as Police Commissioner of New York City. He is Vice President, reluctantly Vice President. He is Governor of New York. He's Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And then obviously becomes President of the United States. When he is Assistant Secretary of the Navy, the Spanish-American War breaks out. When the Spanish-American War breaks out, he resigns from his position and immediately goes to volunteer and enlist into active duty to fight in the Spanish-American War. Now, later on in his life, he writes a book about his time spent in Cuba. And when he finishes this book, he sends it to a good friend of his who reads the book over and says, he sends a telegram to Roosevelt and says to Roosevelt, well, sends a message to Roosevelt, and says, I've never seen the letter type I used more in a book ever in my life. And this book should be renamed Alone in Cuba to correctly depict how Roosevelt told the story. Roosevelt had a great sense of humor, and he loved to poke fun at himself. So Roosevelt actually wrote back and said to him that my wife and children have read your review of my book and have absolutely agreed with it. All right. So Roosevelt was not afraid to poke fun of himself. Okay. Now, Roosevelt's time in the Spanish-American War, it's nicknamed the Splendid Little War. Not that any war is easy or pleasant, but this war is a very quick war. And Secretary of State John Hay, who was Abraham Lincoln's private secretary when he was President of the United States, nicknamed this war the Splendid Little War. Roosevelt is the biggest hero, really, arguably, to emerge from the Spanish-American War, and he sees only about 2.5 hours of actual combat. And his crowded hour occurs during the charge up Kettle Hill. All right. Okay, next picture. By the way, you can see, as I said before, books all over this house. Now, this is this awesome space. When you go into the room to the left, there's this little cove. I shouldn't say little because it's huge. But he's got another desk in that space. Now, this becomes another working space for him. Okay. Once again, you could see himself on this desk. Books, loves to read. Looking at books, loves to read. window very close by because he loves the outdoors. He hates being inside, so he needs to see nature. Also, this is a rhinoceros foot inkwell. You can see over here, once again, his love of the outdoors. So Roosevelt just loves that. The box over here, I actually found this out recently. This box contains photos that was given to Roosevelt from the German Kaiser Wilhelm, after Roosevelt makes a trip to Germany after his presidency. The Kaiser has it photographed, and he sends these photographs to Roosevelt as a gift. So that's what's actually is inside this wooden box over here. All right. Okay. Oh, actually, before we end, I did want to go over one other thing in the North Room. So let me just back up a little bit. I'm sorry. Bear with me here. Okay, so this North Room, it's a huge space, as I said before. It's a 30 by 40 room. It's massive, okay? This room is so big, it becomes like the big event room. A lot of people, a lot of the outsiders think when they come to Sagamore Hill that this room is the family room, that this is where they gather. You know, every house has that room where the family gathers every day and spends time together. That's actually not this room. It's actually the library. That's where they gather every day. They'll recite poetry to one another, read books to one another, talk about current events. That happens in the library. But the North Room becomes that big event room. They'll have big family, big holiday dinners in here. They'll have big events in here, including his youngest daughter, Ethel. She'll have her wedding reception in here. But also brings me to the last thing that I'll discuss about the North Room, which is Roosevelt's last stop before he is buried is actually in the North Room. I'm sorry, just give me 1 second so I can just use this radio. I'm sorry, I apologize for that. So the North Room, this, as I was saying, this was Roosevelt's last stop before he was buried. When Roosevelt dies January 6, 1919 in Sagamore Hill. He dies in what's known as the gate room. They call it the gate room because when the kids were little, they would throw a gate up at the end of the doorway to prevent them from falling down the stairwell, down from the second floor to the first floor. So they put that gate up to prevent them from falling down the stairwell. Towards the end of Roosevelt's life, he's very sickly. He's got doctors coming and going. He's in and out of the hospital. He's actually discharged for the last time from the hospital on Christmas morning. He actually arrives home just in time to open presents with his grandchildren, who are ecstatic to see Grandpa home. Now, Roosevelt, a few weeks later, he's January 5th, he's feeling good. He's dictating letters. He's reading. He's up and about a little bit. So he feels pretty good. He turns to his wife, Edith, before he goes to bed, watching the sun go down over the property, and he says, "I don't think you'll ever know how much I love Sagamore Hill." Unfortunately, in the early mornings on January 6th, Roosevelt suffers a pulmonary embolism, which is a blood clot that forms in his lungs, and he dies. Okay. By the time the doctor arrives, the doctor basically declares the time of death. So Roosevelt dies at 60 years old. He's 60 years old when he dies. I mean, just imagine that for a second. Everything that he accomplishes in his life, he does before 60. He's 60 years old when he dies. It's unbelievable when you think about everything he accomplished. Okay? And everyone at that time, his friends, they're shocked that this man, this giant of a man, this bull moose of a man, has died at 60 years old. But the family knew towards the end. It was kind of kept under wraps. Only the close members of the family and very, very close friends knew that Roosevelt's health was really not doing well. So Roosevelt, he dies, like I said, January 6, 1919. He is actually laid out in state in this room, in the North Room, before he is buried up the road, which we'll talk about in a few moments. Roosevelt, this is the last time that the public has to view him, last time they have to view him before he is buried. So that's kind of the last kind of somber note to this room. Okay, so let's continue. Now, I know when I'm really interested in history, or especially a specific subject, I want to visit everything that's related to it. And Theodore Roosevelt was one of those things to me. So I figured I'd list all the places that you could visit that are related to Theodore Roosevelt. You got Theodore Roosevelt's birthplace in New York City, which is a national park site as well. Sagamore Hill, obviously, Oyster Bay, New York. Come on down. TR inaugural site, which is in Buffalo. That's where he's sworn in as President of the United States after William McKinley, who he is serving as Roosevelt as Vice President William McKinley. When McKinley is assassinated and dies on September 14th, Roosevelt gets sworn in as the 26th president in Buffalo, New York. Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. Roosevelt says if it wasn't for his time in the Dakotas, he never would have became President of the United States. So his ranch is definitely worth visiting out there. Theodore Roosevelt Island in Washington, D.C. TR's grave, you can see over here, off to the right, you can see his tombstone. It's right down the road from Sagamore Hill. It's a 2-minute drive, if that, okay? So it's right here. And then the American Museum of Natural History. Obviously, not only is he a part of that, but also his father was one of the original board members of the Museum of Natural History in New York City. So it's definitely worth going to go check out. All right. So that's the end of the presentation. So does anybody have any, we'll leave it on the last slide here. Does anybody have any questions in regards to anything I spoke about, the house, so on and so forth?
We've got some comments in the chat. Steve asked, is it possible to associate the property buildings cost with today's monetary equivalent?
I believe I came across it once or twice. They said it in today's money, $30,000. I'm sorry, the $17,000 would be about the equivalent of, I believe it's like $500,000, $400,000 to build the house. So figure another probably $1 million for the property. You know, the property was $30,000. So they say that it could be in today's money $1.5 million, maybe a little bit more. I know because of retail for real estate sales in this area, you ain't getting it for that price. But yeah, that's how much the money kind of works out to.
If anybody else has any questions, you can unmute and ask. We have another comment. Thank you so much from Jay French. Informative, interesting, and enjoyable. Looking forward to seeing it in person.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. It was my pleasure. I had a lot of fun doing it.